Thank you everyone for joining. I'm overwhelmed by how many of you came out here to support me today. It is wonderful to see so many familiar faces, and I am very excited to share my thesis work with you today. It is titled Uncertainty-Aware Spatiotemporal Perception for Autonomous Vehicles. I think Stefano mentioned this already, but we will take questions at the end, but during the presentation, feel free to put them into the chat if you like. Recent algorithmic and hardware advancements in robotics have yielded incredible results in the fields of transportation, search and rescue, personal robotics, and this is just to name a few. However, modern autonomous systems still have challenges, particularly operating in complex human environments. For example, an autonomous vehicle in a cluttered, dynamic urban setting. So this is a scene in Italy that portrays some of the challenges that we have on the roads. Let us consider a typical robot perception stack for an autonomous vehicle or an AV. In order to operate in such cluttered environments, AVs must understand and make inferences about the world around them by processing onboard sensor measurements and reasoning about occlusions. This is the task of perception. A planning module is responsible for determining a trajectory to the goal given the obstacles along the way. And finally, a controller executes this plan on the physical system. The focus of my thesis has been addressing the challenges that arise in robot perception, in understanding, anticipating, and making inferences about human behaviors in order to hopefully downstream inform safe and socially cohesive human-robot interactions. The key insight of my work has been that we can extend autonomous vehicle perception capabilities beyond onboard sensors by making uncertainty-aware inferences both in time and in space from observed human behaviors. In my thesis, I consider 4 challenges for robot perception. The first of these is, how do we predict the evolution of a cluttered environment in time? This is difficult since human behavior can vary drastically from person to person, for example, due to aggression or distraction. Human objectives can evolve rapidly in time. And in cluttered settings, there are also computational and visibility limitations. Spatially, robots need to handle partial observability of their environment due to physical occlusions, which may occur due to sensor limitations or other agents on the road obstructing the field of view. Autonomous systems need to reason about these occlusions in order to safely navigate the environment. Once we can make these spatiotemporal inferences, we need to be able to tractably capture the uncertainty in the perception system output. For example, how do we model the irreducible multimodality that arises due to the variability of human behaviors and goals in time, for example, in a trajectory prediction task? And lastly, the perception system should be able to capture the uncertainty associated with scenarios that it has not encountered during its development. My contributions attempt to address each of these 4 challenges. Our first series of work considers the problem of spatiotemporal environment prediction. We propose an end-to-end recurrent framework that uses map-centric occupancy grid representations of the environment in order to make these predictions. Spatially, humans are really good at extrapolating from their experiences by making inferences from observed social behaviors. We propose using observed human behaviors in order to infer occupancy in occluded regions around the robot, in this way treating people as sensors. We apply sensor fusion techniques to achieve spatial occlusion inference in cluttered urban settings with multiple human agents. In order to safely integrate human behavior modeling into the robot autonomy stack, the perception system must also account for uncertainty. Thus, we need to consider how we can efficiently model the output uncertainty or the multimodality in the output in our case. For example, in a trajectory prediction task, given a straight path trajectory, an agent may continue straight or make a turn in the future. Capturing this uncertainty in a tractable manner was the focus of our work here. We proposed a means to sparsify a discrete latent distribution in a deep generative model for trajectory prediction. without compromising its performance. Lastly, we consider how the learned perception model can handle out-of-distribution input data. We propose accomplishing this for trajectory prediction by learning parameters for second-order distributions, such as a Dirichlet distribution, over a low-dimensional and interpretable latent space. These contributions can be categorized into advancements in spatiotemporal perception in human environments and uncertainty-aware machine learning models for trajectory prediction. This slide will serve as the roadmap for the presentation. In this talk, I will focus on the spatiotemporal perception contributions and then briefly overview uncertainty-aware methods towards the end of the presentation. First, in order to talk about spatiotemporal perception, we need to establish an environment representation. There are generally two categories of methods for representing the environment. The first and potentially most common is the object-centric or continuous approach. Agents can be detected and their state can be inferred in continuous space from sensor measurements. The alternative approach is discrete. Occupancy grid maps, or OGMs, discretize the environment into grid cells and estimate a belief over the occupancy of each cell independently. In our spatiotemporal work, we will focus on the OGM representation. The advantages to OGMs are that they can handle partially occluded obstacles and do not require significant data pre-processing or prior knowledge of the environment, such as high-definition maps, for example. Now that we have established our environment representation, let us begin the discussion with the problem of environment prediction. The research question we're looking to answer here is, can we use an occupancy grid representation in order to generate environment state predictions end-to-end without having to also estimate the dynamics of the scene explicitly? We draw on the many computer vision advancements over the past decade. These include semantic segmentation, which models spatial representations, and video frame prediction, which models spatiotemporal representations. Since we're interested in environment prediction in time, we will consider how we can apply existing spatiotemporal models to our problem. Our contributions here are twofold. First, we formulate the environment prediction task in a cluttered urban setting as a video frame prediction problem, due to the similarities in structure between the two problems. Then we demonstrate the capacity of a convolutional long short-term memory network, or conval-SDM, to learn an internal dynamic representation of the environment solely from OGM data without additional dynamic input. Our proposed environment prediction pipeline looks as follows. The input to the system is a LiDAR point cloud. It then goes through a ground segmentation procedure where points associated with the ground are removed. Then we update our local occupancy grid representation with these segmented points. Simultaneously, we can construct estimates of the local dynamics surrounding the ego vehicle, such as cell-wise velocity. And this representation is referred to as a DOGMA, or a dynamic occupancy grid map. These representations can then be stacked together and passed into a prediction architecture. This prediction architecture will make predictions given a series of past timeframes, and it will output a series of future timeframes according to our prediction horizon. I will now cover the occupancy grid construction, the DOGMA velocity estimation, and the prediction architecture in greater detail. Once we have segmented out the ground LiDAR points, we need to construct our OGM data. We employ Evidential Theory, which is also called Dempster-Shafer Theory, or DST, to update our OGMs. Evidential Theory considers a frame of discernment, which is the set of all possible hypotheses. In the OGM case, the set is free and occupied space. A belief mass M is assigned to each set in the power set of the frame of discernment. For the OGM, these are free, shown here in blue, occupied, shown here in red, and free or occupied, also known as occluded regions, shown here in green. Belief masses must sum to 1 over the power set, akin to probabilities over singleton sets. The DST fusion rule allows for the update of a belief mass in each grid cell with a new belief mass from the sensor measurements. The resulting belief masses can then be collapsed to an estimate of probability masses over singleton sets using a transformation like the pygnistic transformation mentioned here. The benefit of evidential theory is that it differentiates lack of information, for example, an uninformative prior, from conflicting information, such as evidence supporting multiple hypotheses, by considering this power set over all hypotheses. In the context of OGMs, lack of information may constitute occlusions, while conflicting information may represent an object moving through a grid cell. Evidential theory can distinguish between these two cases by assigning belief mass to the unknown set of occupied or free for the occluded cells, and conflicting information supporting both occupied and free hypotheses for the moving obstacles. More standard Bayesian approaches might result in about 0.5 probability of occupancy in both of these situations. To estimate the local velocities relative to the ego vehicle within the OGM, we use a particle filter, following the approach by Noose et al. The color wheel here indicates the velocity direction of the cells relative to the ego vehicle. For example, this vehicle is moving up and to the right, so it's denoted as pink. And there's a bus coming here, which is moving down and to the left, which is denoted in green. We note that due to computational limitations, only a part of the environment was covered in particles. We use the PredNet architecture by Lauder et al. For our environment prediction model, which was originally designed for video frame prediction. It contains a recurrent convolutional long short-term memory layer in order to learn the spatiotemporal data structure. This module is denoted in green, while the prediction and target modules are denoted in blue, and the error between them in red. The spatiotemporal representation layer receives input from the error from itself, according to in time, and from upstream layers that are similarly spatiotemporal representation layers. The convenient aspect of the PredNet architecture is that we are able to learn the predictions in a self-supervised manner, since our targets are the existing occupancy grid maps at future time steps. Thus, given our pipeline, we want to see if PredNet is able to effectively learn the environment dynamics and how well it can do so, even without the computationally intensive velocity measurements in the DOGMA representation. First, we consider the environment prediction pipeline using the estimated velocities. We build our OGMs using LiDAR data from the Kitty dataset. We use grids of size 43 meters by 43 meters with a 33 centimeter resolution. We want to predict 1.5 seconds of OGMs ahead in time, given 0.5 seconds of past frames. We plot the mean squared error across the prediction horizon. We see that our approach outperforms the considered baselines, which include propagating the particle filter, a semantic segmentation baseline that consists of only convolutional layers, denoted as FCN, a sanity check baseline that assumes the local environment remains static for the prediction horizon. As could be expected, the MSE error for all approaches steadily rises across the prediction horizon. Here we have a qualitative example. The ground truth is represented in the camera frame and as an OGM from the bird's eye view. There is a bicyclist ahead of us turning right. Considering a prediction model that receives just the static information shown in the center, and that which also receives the velocity estimates on the right, we see that both models predict the local motion of the static environment relative to the ego vehicle in the center quite well. Although the start of the turn is captured for the bicyclist, the dynamic object eventually starts to disappear from the predictions. An important note here is that both predictions with just static OGM data and the particle filter velocities are quite similar. This qualitative observation is confirmed in our quantitative results. We found that although DST DOGMA does slightly better in MSC, this improvement is not significant according to our standard error. In work with Bernard Lange, we have extended the pipeline I've just discussed in order to reduce the effects of object disappearance in the predictions. We do this using a new attention mechanism, which helps the model to pay attention to objects both in space and in time. In the predictions on the Waymo dataset shown here, you can see that the proposed model maintains objects much better than the vanilla PredNet model. In particular, pay attention to this vehicle right next to the ego vehicle, which disappears from the PredNet predictions. So our takeaways from our spatiotemporal environment prediction contributions are that we can frame occupancy prediction in a cluttered urban setting as a video frame prediction task in order to enable spatiotemporal environment predictions. Conval-STM architectures were shown to learn a capable internal dynamic representation of the environment solely from OGM data without the need for additional dynamic input. And furthermore, moving obstacle predictions at long time horizons can be improved with the use of our new attention mechanism. So far, we have talked about how we can enable spatiotemporal predictions in human environments. Now I will discuss our approach to handling spatial occlusions in these environments. Since we do not have sensor measurements in the case of spatial occlusion, we're interested in how we can make use of observed human behaviors to infer occupancy in these unseen spaces. In the real world, we encounter occluded scenarios that may hide dynamic obstacles that appear in our path. In this scenario, a truck is stopped at an intersection with a green light. This behavior is an indicator of an occluded jaywalking pedestrian ahead. Robots and humans currently handle occlusions very differently. Classically, mobile robots may treat occlusions as free space, resulting in dangerous behavior, or occupied space, resulting in overly cautious behavior that may preclude the robot from reaching its goal. Human drivers, on the other hand, make inferences from their observed surroundings to progress in their driving maneuvers, despite this spatial uncertainty. We want to enable robots to have similar occlusion reasoning capabilities. Afolabi et al. Introduced the idea of people as sensors in 2018, where observed driver behaviors are treated as additional sensor measurements in an OGM. However, their work has some limitations. They consider only one observed vehicle in a two-vehicle crosswalk scenario. Their model does not account for the multimodality of the occluded occupancy. For example, if the driver is stopping due to a single pedestrian or a group of pedestrians. And its real-time capability was not investigated as well. To address these limitations, we propose a multi-agent people as sensors occlusion inference paradigm using evidential sensor fusion. We'll learn a driver sensor model end-to-end using a conditional variational autoencoder, or CVAE, in order to capture the multimodality in the distribution. And we demonstrate real-time capable performance on a real-world intersection in the interaction data set. So here we consider an ego vehicle, which is denoted in green, in an intersection. Observed drivers are denoted in cyan. In this example, the ego vehicle is waiting to turn right, while observed vehicle 2 is waiting to turn left. And it is obstructing the ego vehicle's view. The occluded vehicle is denoted in blue. First, we need a mapping from observed driver trajectory to the environment ahead of this driver, which can be represented as an OGM, as we had done before. We can then incorporate this estimated occupancy into the ego vehicle's map. This can be repeated for multiple observed drivers. First, let's consider the driver sensor model, which learns a multimodal mapping from a driver trajectory to the OGM representation of the environment ahead of the driver. We assume that the state of the surrounding visible human drivers is fully observable, which includes position, heading, velocity, and acceleration. We represent the driver sensor model using a conditional variational autoencoder, or CVAE architecture, which encodes the occupancy ground truth MH and trajectory information SH into a discrete latent space Z. Z is then decoded into an occupancy estimate MH hat. During inference, only the observed trajectory SH is encoded into the latent space. The discrete latent space models the multimodality in the distribution using the learned prior P of Z given SH. Then these spatial inferences for multiple observed drivers can be fused together into the ego vehicle's OGM using evidential theory, as we discussed in our spatiotemporal prediction contributions. We validate this pipeline on an uncontrolled intersection in the interaction dataset. The data is captured from a bird's eye view, providing us with ground truth occlusion inference information. We visualize the results of our driver sensor model. The input trajectory is shown as XY position pairs here, and we observe a deceleration maneuver. The predicted OGM with high likelihood shows a lot of occupied space ahead of this driver. The second most likely OGM also shows occupied space ahead. These results match with the ground truth OGM, where a vehicle is crossing the path of the observed driver. In contrast, in the second example, we see a constant speed trajectory. This trajectory on its own does not provide enough information as to whether there's occupied space ahead or free space ahead, as this driver could be driving on an open road or in traffic. The CVAE model reflects this multimodality by outputting two OGMs with similar likelihoods, one with occupied space ahead and one with free space ahead. We evaluate our model using accuracy, mean squared error, or MSE, and image similarity metrics. Image similarity, or IS, measures the structure of the OGM rather than the precision, as our task here is by definition not very precise. We also consider top 3 metrics, where the best metric across the top 3 most likely modes is taken. And this metric reflects how well we capture the multimodality. We break down our metrics into classes due to the data imbalance between free and occupied grid cells. We baseline against 2 other methods. We use k-means to cluster the observed trajectories, as done in the original work by Afolabi et al. And we also extend this baseline to use a Gaussian mixture model so that it can model multimodality. Across almost all metrics and baselines, our proposed CVAE approach for the driver sensor model outperforms. We now consider the full occlusion inference pipeline. A driver is treated as a sensor once 1 second of state information has been collected. We only incorporate the inferred occupancy in regions of occlusion for the ego vehicle, since our inferred occupancy will be less accurate than standard sensor measurements, like, for example, from a LiDAR. Our fusion mechanism runs at 55 Hertz on average, making it real-time capable. In the example shown on the left, the ego vehicle 83 in green is waiting to make a right turn at the intersection. Vehicle 33 is blocking its view and waiting to turn left. Without our occlusion inference mechanism, in the vanilla OGM here, the ego vehicle has no knowledge of occluded vehicle 92. We can see the algorithm work in this video. Since driver 33 is stopped, which is denoted in the orange dots, that's the trajectory, our model infers occupied space ahead, which captures occluded vehicle 92. The ego vehicle then sees vehicle 33 accelerate. The occlusion inference algorithm then infers free space ahead. And so this could indicate to the ego vehicle that it's safe for it to proceed with its right turn maneuver. In this scenario, ego vehicle 108 is waiting at a left turn. Observed driver 106 is ahead of this ego vehicle, also waiting to turn left. Drivers 113, 102, and 116 are also visible and stopped. And an oncoming occluded driver 112 is shown here as well. We can incorporate measurements from all of the drivers. The inferred occupancy is of higher certainty due to multiple agreeing measurements, resulting in a high occupancy region around occluded driver 112. I'm going to let this play one more time. We see we're inferring highly occupied space around this driver. So our takeaways here are that we can use sensor fusion techniques in order to scale the people as sensors approach to multi-agent settings where we have multiple observed drivers. We've shown that capturing multimodality is important when learning and mapping from observed behaviors to the environment ahead of the observed driver. And finally, our occlusion inference approach scales to cluttered real-world settings and is able to achieve real-time capable performance. Now I will briefly overview our contributions to uncertainty-aware learned trajectory prediction models. We consider aleatoric and epistemic uncertainty in the context of trajectory prediction task. Aleatoric uncertainty results from data uncertainty and is irreducible. An example that I mentioned earlier is two equally valid predictions given an input. This is the multimodality we considered in our occlusion inference work. Epistemic uncertainty arises from how well the model represents the data and from data distribution shift. I would like to note here that for the trajectory prediction tasks that aim at making temporal predictions for particular agents, we're making the switch from a map-centric environment representation to an object-centric one. I will now introduce our work in aleatoric uncertainty estimation for trajectory prediction. Discrete lane spaces in CVAEs have been shown to effectively capture multimodality in the distribution for trajectory prediction tasks, where there are multiple valid predictions possible. This is similar to our findings in our occlusion inference contributions. The visualization shown here is from the Trajectron++ paper, which is a state-of-the-art trajectory prediction architecture. And you can see multiple potential future predictions for each pedestrian in the scene. However, prohibitively large discrete lane spaces may be required to actually accurately learn complex data distributions, thereby causing difficulties in interpretability and rendering downstream tasks computationally challenging. For example, robotic motion planning algorithms often plan using a uniform distribution over the state space representation, requiring potentially exorbitantly many samples to accurately cover a large latent space. Similarly, in multi-agent robotics, a high-dimensional latent space encoding may be too large to transmit over limited bandwidth between coordinating robots. The research question we're exploring here is, can we extract an efficient latent sample space without retraining the network or compromising network accuracy? We introduce a new method grounded in evidential theory for sparsifying the discrete latent space of a trained CVAE. We do this while maintaining the multimodality in the distribution. We show that our algorithm achieves a significant reduction in the discrete latent sample space of CVAE networks trained specifically for trajectory prediction without loss of network performance. Well, how do we do this? We propose using conflicting information in an evidential belief mass as a proxy for multimodality. We can then prune the latent classes from the distribution that do not directly receive evidence from the input features and network weights, or have no evidence according to our constructed evidential belief mass function over singleton sets. We can then renormalize this distribution. In this way, we perform post hoc latent space sparsification without sacrificing distributional multimodality. We test our approach on the Trajectron++ architecture trained on the ETH pedestrian dataset. The figure shows some example results. The dotted lines represent the input past trajectory, while the black lines show the ground truth future trajectory taken by the pedestrian. We note that the green modes overlay the blue and the orange modes overlay the green. The examples in the figure demonstrate that our method, shown in green, is able to maintain the multimodality in the trajectory modes, such as going straight, shown here, or turning left. Similarly here, turning right or turning left, while also encompassing the ground truth. Quantitatively, our distribution resulted in an over 50% reduction in the latent sample space size, without sacrificing performance. In contrast, Sparsification, a sparse distribution alternative, which serves as our baseline here, denoted in orange, collapses the multimodality with overly aggressive filtering, at times missing the ground truth, as for example in B and D plots shown here. Thus, our method is better able to balance the sparsity and the multimodality in the distribution here. The derivation of the sparse distribution from evidential theory was a bit involved to write out, so I didn't include it in our slides here. However, in a follow-up paper with Phil Chen, we found that the evidential formulation reduces to a very simple closed form. Ev-Softmax takes as input the output of the last linear layer of the network, this V. The sparsification happens according to a very simple condition. If the logit output Vk for class K is greater than the arithmetic mean of the logits over the classes, then that probability mass is kept. Otherwise, it is pruned. We also showed that the network can be trained directly with the sparse distribution by making a small modification to the distribution during training time. We add an epsilon to the indicator function during training and return to the original version during test time. So to summarize these contributions, we introduced a new method grounded in evidential theory for sparsifying discrete latent sample space of a trained CVAE post hoc. Our experiments show that our algorithm achieves a significant reduction in the discrete latent sample space of CVAE networks trained for the trajectory prediction task without loss of network performance. Our approach sparsifies the latent sample space while maintaining the distributional multimodality, unlike baseline techniques, which remove important modes with overly aggressive filtering. And finally, we developed a way to train directly with our sparse sample distribution. Next, we consider epistemic uncertainty, which can be due to data distribution shift between training and inference time. And this is our work in progress. So why is estimating epistemic uncertainty important? Well, neural networks have been shown to be quite unreliable for out of distribution inputs. For autonomous vehicles, it is really important that the prediction module can provide a level of confidence in its output to a downstream path planner. Existing methods are often applied to either very simple classification tasks or small regression problems. They often require explicit out of distribution data during training, which is not feasible for a high dimensional task like trajectory prediction. And finally, this uncertainty estimate is often not interpretable either to the downstream path planner or to an engineer for development. The research question we're exploring here is, how do we meaningfully and tractably capture epistemic uncertainty for this trajectory prediction task? Well, it turns out that evidential belief mass functions actually have a correspondence to Dirichlet distributions, which are distributions over categorical distributions. Therefore, they can model the higher order epistemic uncertainty over a classification task. Learning Dirichlet parameters for epistemic uncertainty estimation is referred to as evidential deep learning. Recent work has proposed means of bypassing explicit out of distribution examples during training with the use of deep generative models. Our proposed contributions here are to investigate a new application of evidential deep learning methods to epistemic uncertainty quantification in these trajectory prediction tasks, and to, maybe particularly importantly, define a notion of interpretability by distributing this uncertainty over low dimensional latent variables, which correspond to factors like past agent behavior, the environment map, and the social context surrounding the agent of interest. Since trajectory prediction architectures often use a discrete latent space or encoding to capture the multimodality in the predictions, the epistemic uncertainty can be modeled over this latent classification task. The figure shows the inputs and outputs of our proposed architecture. The encoder takes as input the combined representation, which includes the HD map, the social context shown in yellow, and the past trajectory for the agent of interest. The output is 3 Dirichlet distributions over the agent behavior, the map, and the social context in the scene. The latent spaces are self-supervised via decoders for each category, the output of which are shown here. The expected value of the fused Dirichlet distribution provides the standard categorical distribution over predicted trajectories that we would have in a normal trajectory prediction network. The sum of the Dirichlet parameters, alpha 0, can give us a sense of certainty in the predicted categorical distribution. We test our approach on the new scenes dataset, and here are some very preliminary results. We modified the new scenes dataset for our out of distribution detection task. We consider slower input trajectories as in distribution and faster ones as out of distribution. We expect higher alpha 0 values for in distribution examples and lower alpha 0 values for out of distribution examples. In the examples shown here, there's a stark difference in the alpha 0 values for the slower in distribution trajectory shown here and the faster out of distribution input trajectory shown at the bottom. What is interesting is that for these 2 particular cases, the alpha 0 values for the HD map and the social context are quite similar. For the HD map, the values are lower. So one possible hypothesis for why this might be happening is that for in distribution, we're looking at slower speeds. Slower speeds might indicate smaller roads that don't look as much like a highway, so maybe fewer lanes. For the social context, the alpha 0 values are higher. Again, a potential reason for this could be that slower trajectories would usually occur in traffic rather than faster trajectories, which would potentially have fewer cars around. Overall, the latent variable reflecting the input past behavior clearly distinguishes between these 2 examples as we hoped and expected. The learned Dirichlet parameters should serve as pseudo-counts for the data. Although the scales are different in these 2 plots, we see that the Dirichlet parameters alpha 0 for the agent shown on the left reflect the trends in the ground truth data distribution shown on the right across the trajectory length, where a higher length is faster input trajectory. So to conclude, we have discussed 4 different themes in our contributions. We have shown how we can make predictions for the spatiotemporal environment end-to-end from a map-centric or occupancy grid representation of the world using recurrent representation learning. We then talked about how we can make inferences in occluded regions in multi-agent settings by modeling observed human behaviors as sensor measurements for the environment occupancy. Then we talked about how we can efficiently estimate uncertainty for trajectory prediction tasks. We showed a way to sparsify a discrete latent sample space in a deep generative model for the trajectory prediction task while maintaining its performance. And we also showed some preliminary work on modeling epistemic uncertainty for this task using deep generative models and second order distributions over low dimensional interpretable latent variables. There are several interesting avenues for future work. We are interested in using adaptive stress testing to characterize the failures in map-centric end-to-end perception systems, as in our environment prediction work, versus more classical object-centric perception pipelines. Understanding the failures of each system would enable us to build redundant systems that are able to complement each other. We're also interested in how the perception ideas developed in this thesis could be incorporated into path planning and control. We would seek to demonstrate the benefits of making inferences about human behavior and accounting for uncertainty across the full autonomy stack. For example, we're looking at incorporating spatiotemporal environment predictions into model predictive control on an experimental vehicle in collaboration with the DDL. Here, the hope would be that incorporating these predictions into MPC would result in a more proactive planner. Furthermore, in ongoing work, we're studying how incorporating occlusion inference into a reinforcement learning framework may help the robot to navigate in crowds. And finally, I'm interested in exploring how a path planner could handle epistemic uncertainty estimates from an upstream perception system, resulting in safe fallback modes in unfamiliar situations. Here's a list of my publications. These are my references. I would like to thank my sponsors for making this research possible. And I would like to take a moment now to thank all of my collaborators and everyone around me who has supported me over the years. So thank you. It has been a pleasure to work with all of you. I have learned so much from each and every one of you.